I'm sure that no young adult wants to be known as a Gen Zer or a Gen Zer, but early in the week I was really struck by, seeing people in that cohort talking about brands and how they could create content and their sort of the changing notions of identity. So I saw a really interesting kind of piece on masculinity redefined. Saw some great stuff presented by Samsung, who'd done a load of research into kind of what motivates that group. So for me, there was a real sense at the beginning of the week that cohort do demand social impact and responsible behaviour by brands and meaning and purpose, much more so than say the millennial cohort, who were supposed to be people who were motivated by kind of business doing good. So I got a real sense that marketing is going to change and is listening to those people, and they're actually going to change marketing for the better. 19-year-old was 5 when YouTube launched, so they've kind of grown up with different influences, different notions of creativity. They're more collaborative. They're more kind of given to working in teams. I think that they are, this is one of the phrases that were being used, that they're seeking to defy conventions, because lots of the conventions that are out there in the world are not particularly helpful to them.
Yeah, and I think it's having a really positive effect on marketing in general. I think that desire by that younger generation, not exclusively younger generation, but that desire for brands to do good stuff in the marketplace, and I think brands are responding to that. We've seen the advertising coming out of P&G with Gillette very much changing, the best a man can get and what that means, and I think that's really resonating. And some of the research we've done earlier this year is demonstrating that people are much more willing to either embrace a brand or to boycott a brand based on its sort of social purpose and how it behaves. I think I do think it's a valid concern for agencies and for brands to think about, well, what are we doing, or what could we do beyond selling products that actually mean that we're creating a world where this younger generation feels much more positive going into it. So I guess there's a couple of moments that sort of come together, and I think that's the idea of a balance, or the sort of the concept of and as opposed to or. And I think certainly my experience over the last few years at Cannes, but also at other industry events, is the sort of almost grandstanding of luminaries on one side of the argument that we sort of have in the industry at the moment, which is this idea of creativity versus a very sort of math-driven, data-orientated approach to things. And I think a lot of that was driven by sort of the desire for inflammatory language and column inches. Yeah, so you get a big famous creative who's talking about it's all about individual brilliance and creativity. But the thing I thought was actually really lovely was so many talks I went to this year were embracing actually that middle ground, and that's a little bit more boring, you could argue, but actually it produces, I think, really amazing work. So for me, that sort of concept of and, that concept of balance, has been something really, I think, optimistic for the future of the industry.
I got a feeling in the various seminars that I went into that people were starting to figure this out, but they were figuring it out because of the thought process they were applying to the use of the technology and seeing it as a means to solve a human problem rather than an end in itself. And I think when people stop seeing things as ends and see them as means, then you get great work out of them. In essence, what they were saying is we live in a world where everyone thinks about the cut down for social, but actually what we should be doing is thinking about making a static thing animated, but for 6 seconds. So I mean, that was a big takeout for me. Like, don't think cut down, think still forward or animation. For me, that's one of the great things. Actually, one of the great things about Cannes, is that our industry seeks to make itself better overall by sharing stuff that normally you would keep a kind of competitive advantage. And obviously there's an element of people wanting to kind of show off and make a name for themselves. But I think that I always feel a genuine sense that people want everybody to do better work. But there is an interesting spirit of generosity in the way that a lot of people behave.
I would argue one of the reasons that in empirical data, social display and those types of channels are sometimes a little bit weaker in terms of their ability to drive brand outcomes, to drive business outcomes, is because we're creatively approaching it the wrong way. If you're not designing from the ground up for 6 seconds and you're doing the cut down, as Sean says, you're not going to be as effective.
I think that there's a real feeling that planning for experience, total experience, is kind of where it's at now. And I think account planning, which often has been a little bit stuck in there, we're trying to write a brief for a 30-second ad. I think like the top account planners now are kind of recognizing that they're trying to write briefs and create work which works across a whole range of kind of channels and solves business problems in different ways.
There was a real drive for more creativity, more understanding people, but not at the expense of everything you can also learn from behavioral data. So it was, that and point I think came out again.
It's very important for us going forward that we make sure that people get from behind their desks and go and put themselves, in context, walk a mile in people's shoes, hang out with them. Yeah. Learning from the natural world, and actually the most interesting, evolutionary occurrences and biodiversity sort of flourishes in these places where two different terrains meet each other. So they were saying, look at the places where different kind of cultures are kind of colliding, and that's where kind of future-facing insights will come from.